the unexpected encounter. The dense jungle was alive with strange sounds as the explorers moved cautiously through the thick, tangled trees. They had been on this alien planet for days, searching for new species, documenting wildlife, and mapping out the dangerous terrain. But nothing had prepared them for what they were about to witness. As they carefully stepped into a small clearing, one of the explorers, Marco, froze. His eyes widened in shock. The rest of the team followed his gaze and stopped dead in their tracks. In front of them, a massive creature lay on the ground, its body covered in deep, bleeding wounds. It was an apex predator, one of the most feared creatures on this planet. Its sleek, muscular body, covered in dark, thick scales, was a sight to behold. The creature's glowing eyes, though weak and pained, still held a spark of danger. Its sharp claws and teeth were a reminder of why it was at the top of the food chain. But what shocked the explorers the most was not the predator's presence. It was the human standing calmly beside it, holding out food. A tall, weathered figure, the human moved with confidence, almost as if the predator wasn't a threat. He was dressed in basic survival gear, his hands steady as he placed the food in front of the creature. The predator growled weakly but didn't attack. Instead, it sniffed the food, its massive jaws closing around it as it ate slowly. There was no aggression, no fight. It simply ate, as if it was a domestic animal, not a terrifying beast. The explorers watched, confused and unsure of what to think. They had heard stories of humans being able to tame wild creatures, but this was something they couldn't believe. How could this human approach such a creature without fear? Was he insane? Or was there something more to this situation than they realized? For a few moments the clearing was silent, except for the faint sounds of the predator eating. Marco, the team's leader, whispered to his team, "What's going on here? Why? Isn't the creature attacking him?" Another explorer, Lena, looked around nervously. "It's impossible. That creature is a killer. It should have killed him the moment he approached." The human didn't seem to hear them. He spoke softly to the predator, his voice low and calm. The explorers couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. He wasn't afraid. In fact, he seemed fond of the creature. A bond of sorts had clearly formed between them. Then, something even stranger happened. The predator, still weakened by its injuries, let out a low, almost contented sound. It nuzzled the human's leg, like a pet seeking affection. The human gently patted the creature's head, as if it were nothing more than a loyal dog. The explorers stood frozen, trying to make sense of the bizarre scene before them. They had come to document the most dangerous wildlife, but instead, they had stumbled upon something far more extraordinary, a human who had tamed the untamable. The questions swirled in their minds, but the answer seemed just out of reach. What was happening here? And more importantly, why did this human seem so at ease with a creature that should have torn him apart? The air in the clearing felt thick, heavy with tension, as the explorers struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. They had to know more. This was just the beginning. A strange connection as the explorers stood in stunned silence. The scene in front of them became even more bewildering. The human continued to feed the apex predator, moving with a calmness that defied logic. The creature, once a terror of the planet, had completely lowered its guard. It was no longer the merciless hunter they had feared. It was a wounded animal, at the mercy of the human who had shown it an unexpected kindness. Lena, the youngest member of the team, was the first to speak, her voice shaky with disbelief. "How is this possible? This isn't just feeding an animal, it's like he's caring for it like it's his pet." Her words hung in the air, each one feeling more unreal than the last. The human, still focused on the predator, didn't acknowledge them. His attention was entirely on the creature, as if he and the apex predator shared a quiet understanding. He whispered something, his voice soft, soothing, like he was speaking to an old friend. The predator, instead of lunging or growling in warning, seemed to relax under the human's touch, its massive head lowering slightly as it savored the food. Marco, the leader of the group, frowned. "This can't be right." This isn't how apex predators behave. They're solitary, territorial, and vicious. His eyes darted to the creature still lying on the ground, its once threatening form now a passive, injured giant. But what Marco failed to grasp was that this wasn't just about survival for the human. This was something far deeper. The way the human interacted with the predator, so gentle, so trusting, spoke of something the explorers couldn't comprehend yet. As the human finished feeding the creature, he paused for a moment, resting his hand on the predator's side. The once mighty beast, now weak and vulnerable, leaned into the touch. The bond between them was undeniable. It was almost as if the predator understood that this human wasn't just another explorer. He was something different. This was a relationship, born from trust, not domination. Lena felt a chill run down her spine as she watched. It wasn't fear of the predator. It was the realization that the predator wasn't the only one out of place here. The human was different too. He wasn't like anyone they had ever met. He had tamed a beast, one of the most dangerous creatures on this planet, and in doing so, he had done something the rest of them couldn't even begin to fathom. The other explorers, David whispered, "It's not just feeding, and it's something else. It's a connection." His voice was barely audible, but the truth of it hit everyone like a wave. There was something more than survival happening here. The human and the predator weren't just coexisting, they were linked. The predator, having finished its meal, now turned its glowing eyes toward the group of explorers. It studied them silently, as if weighing whether they posed a threat. For a moment it looked almost curious. The explorers held their breath. They were standing on the edge of something massive. Whatever was happening between this human and the apex predator was beyond anything they had expected, and it was impossible to ignore. The air grew thick with uncertainty. Why hadn't the predator attacked? What was this human to it? And most importantly, what would happen next? The explorers could feel it then, an unspoken shift. They weren't just observers anymore. They were witnesses to something extraordinary. A strange, almost mystical bond had been forged before their eyes, one that went beyond nature and reason. What had they stumbled upon? And was it something they could ever understand? Flashback, the human story. The explorers, still standing in the clearing, couldn't pull their eyes away from the unlikely scene before them. The apex predator, now lying calmly on the ground, had closed its eyes, resting under the human's watchful gaze. It seemed as if everything had fallen into an uneasy peace, but there was an undeniable curiosity building among the group. They needed to know how this strange bond had formed, how this human had managed to tame such a beast. As if on cue, the human finally broke his silence. He glanced up from the creature and saw the group of explorers watching him. There was no shock. In his expression, just a tired, knowing look. Slowly, he walked toward them, his boots crunching on the dirt as he approached. "You must be wondering how this happened," the human said, his voice low but clear. It was a voice that held a weight to it, as if every word had been earned through time and experience. He gestured to the predator, who had now opened its eyes, watching the explorers warily but not with aggression. "Come, sit. I'll tell you my story." The explorers exchanged looks, unsure of what to expect, but curiosity overpowered any caution. One by one they sat, keeping their distance from the predator. The human, however, sat right beside it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He began. "It wasn't always like this," he said, his gaze distant, as if remembering something far in the past. "When I first landed here, I was just like you. I didn't understand this planet. I didn't understand its creatures. I thought I was alone." His voice trailed off for a moment, and the group fell silent, feeling the weight of his words. The deep human continued. "I was a scout, sent to chart the planet, to make sure it was habitable for colonization. But what they didn't tell us was that the planet was more alive than we expected. Everything was aggressive, predators, plants, even the weather. I was stranded here when my team was wiped out. There was no escape." He paused, looking down at the predator beside him. "And then I met him." The group listened intently, all of them hanging on to his every word. The human story was one of isolation and survival, but it was more than that. It was a story of finding connection in the most unexpected of places. I didn't know what he was at first, the human continued. He was just another apex, predator, ruthless and wild, hunting anything that moved. I didn't know what I was getting into when I first crossed paths with him. He nearly killed me. He smiled faintly at the memory, but I fought back. We both did. And that's when something changed. I didn't back down, and neither did he. The human's eyes darkened, and the explorers could see the depth of his past struggles in the way he spoke. In the beginning, it was about survival. I was wounded. He was wounded. Neither of us could move fast enough to escape the dangers of the planet. But we found each other, just barely. And over time, something happened. A bond formed, slowly. I started bringing him food, sheltering him from storms, and he started trusting me. The human looked at the predator, now lying peacefully at his side. At first, it was just about staying alive, but then it became more. It became about respect. I didn't tame him. I earned his respect. And now, after all these months, he's not just a predator. He's my companion. He's my family. The explorers were stunned into silence. The human's story was not just about taming a beast. It was about mutual understanding. This wasn't a typical human-animal relationship. It was a bond forged in hardship, survival, and most of all, trust. Marco, the leader, broke the silence first. "You're telling us you chose to stay here? With him?" The human nodded. "I didn't choose it at first. I had no choice. But now I wouldn't leave him. This planet, it's dangerous, yes, but out here I'm not alone anymore. We've survived together." As the human spoke, the predator let out a low, almost contented growl, nuzzling his shoulder in a quiet display of affection. The explorers looked at each other, realizing they had just uncovered something extraordinary. What they thought was a simple human encounter with nature was far deeper. It was a relationship built on survival. Yes, but also something much more rare, an understanding that transcended the idea of predator and prey. What they were witnessing wasn't just a human and a creature coexisting, it was something new, something neither species had ever experienced before. The moment of trust, the sun was beginning to dip behind the dense trees, casting long shadows across the jungle floor. The explorers, still processing the human story, were on edge. There was an odd tension in the air. Something was about to shift. They could feel it. The strange connection between the human and the apex predator was undeniable, but the true weight of that bond hadn't hit them yet. As the human sat beside the predator, he reached out and ran a hand gently along the creature's rough scales, a silent communication passing between them. The predator, despite its massive size and dangerous nature, leaned into the touch with an almost affectionate gesture, as if it had become accustomed to the human's presence. It was a moment that felt too intimate, too personal for any outsider to truly understand. Lena watched, her eyes wide with wonder and a bit of confusion. Is it really that tame?" she whispered, half to herself. "I mean, it's not even reacting like it should. This thing's supposed to rip someone's face off if they get too close." Marco shook his head, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "It's not just tame. That's the thing. It's trusting him like it's its own kind." Suddenly, the predator's head lifted and its glowing eyes locked onto the group of explorers. For a moment, it studied them with an unnerving intensity, and a chill ran down everyone's spine. The air grew heavier. The creature's gaze was no longer that of a wild animal. It was calculating, almost knowing. And then, just as quickly, it lowered its head, a soft, contented rumble vibrating in its chest. It wasn't a growl, but a sound of satisfaction, like it had made a decision about them. The human, sensing the shift, looked up from the predator and met their eyes. There was no fear in his expression, only quiet acknowledgement. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're still not sure what's happening here. You're wondering if this is real, or if you've stumbled upon some kind of illusion." He stood slowly, his hand still resting on the predator's side. The creature made no move to stop him. Instead, it seemed to shift, giving the human more space to move. "I'm not going to lie to you," the human continued, his voice firm yet gentle. "It wasn't easy. The first time I approached him, he nearly tore me apart. I had no idea how to survive here. But over time I learned, not just about the predators, but about him, and about myself. You see, trust doesn't come overnight. It's earned." The predator turned its head slightly, looking at the human with what seemed like quiet recognition, as if it understood. The human smiled, a knowing, almost sad smile. "It's funny, really. When I first found him, I thought I was the one who needed to survive. But now, I'm the one who's been saved." Lena couldn't hold back any longer. "Saved?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You mean, this creature saved you?" The human nodded, slowly sitting back down next to the predator. "Not in the way you might think. In the beginning it was about survival, but somewhere along the way it became about something more. This isn't just a pet. It's not a wild animal I've tamed. He's my partner, my equal in a world that doesn't care whether we live or die. And now we're more than just two survivors, we're a team." The predator growled again, but this time it wasn't out of aggression. It was a sound of companionship, a recognition of the human's words. The explorers, watching all of this unfold, were left speechless. They had expected to find a story about a lone human surviving on a hostile planet. What they hadn't expected was to find a bond, one that went deeper than simple survival. The predator, once the embodiment of danger and death, was now something else entirely. It was a protector. It was a friend. And together, the human and the apex predator had become something that defied all logic, an unshakable force in a world built on chaos. As the sun dipped lower, casting the clearing in shadow, the human and the predator shared a moment of quiet connection. The explorers, still processing the enormity of what they had witnessed, were left to wonder, was this a story of survival? Or was it a story about something far more profound? Something that had changed the very nature of what it meant to be human and what it meant to be a predator. Trouble approaches. The tranquility of the jungle, once again shrouded in the deepening dusk, was suddenly shattered. The air, thick with the hum of unseen creatures, began to vibrate with tension. The human and the apex predator, side by side, were still locked in their quiet moment of mutual understanding, but the explorers, still struggling to process the depth of their bond, didn't notice the shifting shadows at first. The predator's ears flicked back, a slight tremor running through its massive frame. Its eyes, once relaxed, were now sharp and focused, scanning the dense underbrush with an intensity that sent a shiver through the group. The human, too, sensed the change in the atmosphere. He stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to the predator's side, a silent reassurance. "Stay close," the human muttered, his voice a low command. He didn't need to say more. The predator's growing unease spoke volumes. The explorers instinctively gathered closer, sensing the danger that had just appeared on the horizon. Then, through the trees, they heard it. A low, rumbling growl. It was guttural, deeper than anything they had heard before. The sound was enough to freeze the blood in their veins. The predators they had encountered on this planet were formidable, but this was something else. The human's expression hardened, his hand now gripping the predator's side with more urgency. "Another one," he whispered, almost to himself. Before the explorers could react, the ground beneath their feet vibrated. The dense undergrowth parted with an explosion of movement, and there, emerging from the shadows, was a creature they had only heard rumors of, an even larger, more terrifying apex predator. This one was built like a mountain of muscle and sinew, its eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger, its claws scraping the ground with each massive step. Its jaws were lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth that could tear through steel. The human didn't hesitate. His voice rang out, clear and commanding, "Stay back. This one's mine." The explorers froze, watching in awe as the human stepped forward, facing the colossal creature without a hint of fear. The predator at his side growled in response, standing protectively between the human and the newcomer. It was clear now that the bond between the two had transcended the simple relationship of predator and prey. It was something stronger, something more dangerous. But the new predator, the one that had entered the clearing, wasn't deterred. It snarled, showing no sign of retreat. Instead, it seemed to grow more aggressive, its eyes locked on the human and the apex predator. Lena's voice cracked with panic. "Are we supposed to fight this thing? It'll kill us all." Marco quickly pulled her back, his voice tense. "We stay out of the way. This isn't our fight." But even as they moved to the edge of the clearing, their hearts pounded in their chests. They had seen dangerous creatures, but nothing like this. This new predator was a beast of nightmares, with strength that dwarfed anything they had encountered. The human, now standing directly between the two predators, took a deep breath. His eyes never left the new threat, his stance unwavering. The apex predator beside him mirrored his movements, ready to strike at a moment's notice. "We do this together," the human muttered to his companion, his voice steady and sure. "You know the drill." The massive predator beside him gave a low guttural growl, its stance shifting as it prepared for the confrontation. The explorers watched, mesmerized by the sheer audacity of the human's confidence. They had no idea what kind of training or perhaps madness had led this man to be able to stand before such a terrifying force with nothing but his words and his bond to the predator at his side. But the new threat wasn't backing down. In fact, it took another step forward, its claws digging into the earth as it let out a blood-curdling roar. And that was when the human did the unthinkable. Without a single word, he stepped forward, closer to the new predator, allowing the creature to get within striking distance. The apex predator at his side lunged forward, its massive jaws snapping, with terrifying speed. But the human didn't flinch, he didn't retreat. He stood tall, trusting in the bond he had built with his companion. The explorers held their breath, realizing that the stakes had just become far higher than they could have ever imagined. This wasn't just a battle of survival anymore. It was a test of the human's bond with the apex predator. Could they truly survive together against a force like this? The tension was unbearable. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as the two apex predators circled each other, ready to clash in a fight that would determine the fate of them all. The final battle. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the two apex predators faced off, a brutal dance of instinct and power about to begin. The human stood tall, unwavering between his loyal companion and the new beast that towered over them. The air was thick with the weight of the moment. Every breath seemed to draw out the inevitable collision of raw power. The explorers, still in awe, were barely able to breathe, let alone move. The new predator let out a roar that sent birds scattering from the treetops. It was a sound so full of rage and power that it seemed to shake the very air around them. The creature's eyes locked on the human and his pet, its muscles coiling as if ready to pounce at any moment. The tension was so palpable it felt like time itself had slowed, but the human didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his back straight, eyes never leaving the new predator's glowing gaze. His hand was still resting on the apex predator beside him, a silent command, a promise. Together they would face this threat head-on. They didn't need words. They had something far more potent: trust. With a growl, the apex predator lunged forward, its jaws snapping at the new beast. The larger predator countered with a swipe of its massive claws, the force of the strike sending leaves and debris flying. But the bond between the human and his companion was clear. The two moved in perfect sync, anticipating each other's movements. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. It was as if they had become one creature, a seamless fusion of strength and instinct. The explorers watched in stunned silence. They had never seen anything like this. Two apex predators fighting, but not against each other. They were united in the face of an overwhelming threat. The human's role wasn't just that of a bystander. He was an active participant in this primal dance. He was part of it. He was the reason the two predators were fighting as one. Lena, unable to tear her eyes away from the brutal spectacle, whispered, "It's like they're one. The human and the predator. They're in sync." Marco, though equally transfixed, nodded grimly. "It's not just survival anymore. This is a fight for something bigger. They're protecting each other." The battle raged on. Each strike from the larger predator met with a precise counter from the apex predator at the human side. The ground cracked under the sheer force of their blows, and the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Every move felt like it could be the final one. But with every moment it became clearer. This fight wasn't about dominance. It was about something far deeper, a bond so unbreakable it could withstand even the most impossible odds. The human was everywhere at once, commanding, guiding, and, in the most unexpected way, fighting alongside the predator. At one point, he ducked beneath a massive claw strike, his movements sharp and fluid. He rolled to the side and sprang to his feet, launching a sharp command to his companion, who responded instantly, lunging forward in a coordinated attack that took the new predator by surprise. With a savage roar, the larger beast staggered back, its leg buckling under the force of the apex predator's bite. For a moment there was a flicker of hesitation in its eyes, something like doubt, a momentary recognition that it was facing more than just another creature to conquer. It was facing a partnership forged in blood and survival, one that would not be easily defeated. The human, breathing hard, didn't stop. His eyes were focused, his every action precise. He had become more than just a survivor. He had become the heart of this battle, the catalyst that brought the predators together. His unwavering confidence, his trust in the creature beside him, fueled their attack. And then, with one final deafening roar, the battle reached its peak. The apex predator lunged again, its teeth sinking deep into the neck of the larger creature. The human, in the same fluid motion, moved in close, guiding the predator's strike with practiced ease. There was a sickening snap as the new predator crumpled to the ground, defeated. For a moment the jungle was silent save for the heavy breathing of the combatants. The explorers, still processing the chaos of the battle, slowly began to realize what they had just witnessed. The human and the apex predator had emerged victorious, not because they were stronger, but because they were united. They had fought, not as two separate entities, but as one. The human, bloodied but unbroken, looked down at the predator beside him. The creature, its massive form still twitching from the exertion, nuzzled against him, the bond between them undeniable. The explorers, still standing at the edge of the clearing, were left breathless. They had seen what no one could have imagined, a battle not just for survival but for the very essence of what it meant to trust, to fight, and to protect. They had witnessed the impossible, a human and an apex predator, fighting side by side, and in doing so, showing the world that sometimes survival isn't just about strength. It's about the bonds that can be forged in the unlikeliest of places, and those bonds, once formed, could conquer anything. The realization, a new future. Jungle was still, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The battle had ended, but the weight of what had just happened hung in the air like an unspoken truth. The larger predator lay motionless, a testament to the ferocity of the fight and the undeniable bond between the human and his companion. The ground around them was torn, the earth scarred by the violence of the clash, but in its aftermath there was an eerie calm. The human stood tall, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body covered in bruises and cuts. His eyes, however, were steady, focused. He didn't look like a survivor. He looked like someone who had just proven a point, not just to the explorers, but to the world itself. He looked like a man who had discovered something no one else had ever dreamed possible. Lena was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Did you see that? Her eyes were wide with disbelief. They fought together. They didn't just survive. They won together. Marco, still taking in the aftermath of the battle, nodded slowly. I've never seen anything like it. It wasn't just about strength, it was about trust, about something deeper. The human, hearing their words, slowly turned to face the group. The predator at his side remained close, its body still tense but relaxed now that the danger had passed. It was a protector, a friend, an equal. The human's voice broke the silence. You're right. It wasn't about survival. Not in the way you think. It was about learning how to be something more. More than just an isolated human trying to make it through a harsh world. More than just a predator trying to rule this land. He paused, looking at the fallen beast. His face softened as he gazed at the predator beside him, and there was a moment of quiet understanding between them. It's about connection, he said quietly. I found this creature in a world that wanted to tear me apart. I was alone. But when I saved him, I saved myself too. And together, we found something the world doesn't understand. A way to coexist. A way to fight not just for our own survival, but for something bigger than us. The explorers exchanged glances, each of them beginning to realize the profound nature of what they had just witnessed. The human and the apex predator hadn't just fought for their lives. They had fought for something that couldn't be measured by strength or fear. They had fought for each other. The human continued, his eyes now locking onto Marco's. You came here expecting to see the harsh, dangerous world of predators and prey. But what you saw today, what we've built together, isn't just about that. It's about what happens when you look beyond the surface. What happens when you stop seeing each other as enemies. When you start seeing each other as equals, no matter the species. Lena stepped forward cautiously, her voice soft but filled with awe. So, what does that mean for us? For humanity? You've shown us something no one would ever believe. But how do we fit into this world now? The human smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with something between pride and something deeper. Perhaps a bit of sadness too. It means you're not alone. It means that in this universe, with all its dangers, you don't have to fight every battle by yourself. You might find an ally where you least expect it. Sometimes your greatest enemy can become your greatest strength, and your greatest strength might not be what you think it is. The predator at his side nudged him gently, its head tilted, eyes soft yet unwavering. The human rested his hand on its head, and for a brief moment the entire jungle seemed to hold its breath. The bond between them was a silent promise, unspoken, yet understood in every glance, every movement. We've shown you something, the human said, his voice resolute. A new way of looking at this world, not through fear or domination, but through respect. You'll go back with your stories, your evidence. But remember, the story doesn't end here. This planet, this world, isn't just a place of predators and prey, it's a place of connection. If you look closely enough, you'll see it. Marco finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual but filled with a new sense of clarity. So what now? The human gave him a final, thoughtful look. Now, you decide what kind of future you want. This world isn't what you thought it was, and neither are you. It's time for you to realize that. With that, he turned, guiding his apex predator back toward the jungle's heart. The explorers stood in place, watching them disappear into the shadows. The world they had entered, filled with danger and chaos, now seemed entirely different. It wasn't just a place of survival. It was a place of possibility. A place where the unlikeliest of connections could change everything. And as the last of the daylight faded, the explorers stood there, their minds racing with the implications of what they had seen. They hadn't just witnessed a battle, they had witnessed the beginning of something new. Something that, for once, didn't fit neatly into the categories of predator and prey, hunter and hunted. It was a world where survival meant more than just strength. It meant trust. It meant finding allies in the most unexpected places. And it meant that, maybe, just maybe, humanity's place on this planet wasn't as isolated as they once believed. You said,